Hello everyone, my name is Spectre Zero, and welcome to my first YouTube video. Over my many years of playing World of Warcraft, I've gained a proficiency at making and editing Weakauras. I've also been asked several times to help people with theirs as well. Anything from making some cooldown tracking, to boss ability tracking, to programming a full rotation. So I thought for my first video, I'd make a guide to it to help people understand what Weakauras is and how to possibly to make their own so they can add a tool to their kit for their own adventures. Weakauras is an add-on for World of Warcraft. It watches the combat log as well as what's going on your screen. It reads it and then uses the information it finds to produce graphics, sounds, and animations as well as text based on rules that you set. For instance, we have some examples here. These icons here on the right above the NPC are a set of auras. It's telling this one is programmed for the rogue's rotation. It tells me what needs done. For instance, the first one there, I know because from where I programmed it that it means that I need to apply my poisons. So I'll go through and apply these 4 here real quick. And once I get that done, that icon should disappear because it's looking for this specific poison, amplifying poison. The other ones are for during combat. The letters correspond to key bindings, so SC is shift plus the E key. The next one is just plain E for garrote, and then like shift R for death mark. A couple other Weakauras on screen here is this one in the top left, which is actually a progress bar. What it'll do is it'll have a bar on it while I'm fighting that shows me the death mark's cooldown. The other one is a progress texture. It's this blood drop looking one here. As it watches for a garrote on the enemy, and as that ticks down, this will actually empty out. It will turn gray with a timer under it as well. Another one you'll see as I start fighting here is for combo points. It puts these red ticks around my screen, up to 5 of them. The first 4 it will hide and show as I generate combo points, and then if I hit 5 or more, all the other ones disappear, and then it shows this rotating green. The rotation is part of the animations that you can program into Weakauras, which we'll go over. So that's the types of Weakauras we're going to look at. I will, over time, show you how to make them yourself. Before we take a look at how to make auras, I wanted to pull back the curtain a bit and give you a look at what's behind the scenes on an aura. Most Weakauras, as well as a lot of programming, can be boiled down to if-then statements and with conditionals. I got Excel here to show you an example of what that looks like. It's taking 2 values and comparing them in some way, and then giving you an output based on the comparison. Up here in our formula bar is what one looks like. So it's saying if the value in D1 is less than or equal to the value in E1, then return true. If it does not match, then return false. We can change the value and it will change that cell. This is what's behind a lot of programming, as well as pretty much all auras. The idea is that the conditional here, this part, is your trigger. What you're telling it is to compare a set of values, and if it matches, then then return true. If it does not match, then return false. We can bring this back to auras by using this formula set up here as an example. Let's say that this is actually your current character health, the percent, and then the limit, which is the point at which we want the aura to show up. Let's say we're trying to see if you're going to hit when you're at 60% or lower, so we can pop up an aura that tells you to use a defensive or a healing ability. So we set that up like this, and this here would be, if it's true, show the aura. If it's false, hide it. So we can adjust this, and if at any given point your health drops under that limit, it shows true. If we bump it up, and let's say somebody heals you and you go back to 80%, oh, there it's false. So what would happen is at true, the aura would show up. At false, it would hide. So I've gone over the basics of how if-then formulas work. They do get more advanced than this, but this is what we'll need to know as we move forward with the auras to understand what's going on in the background and how the triggers are functioning. So we'll switch back to World of Warcraft and go over the auras in more detail, as well as the GUI. To open the GUI, or the graphical user interface, you do /WA and enter, and it brings this up. There's a lot here because it's got all my previously made auras, but let's go over each section in detail a little bit here. For starters, on the left, this shows you which auras are currently loaded in the memory and which ones are not. What that means is if they're loaded, they are actively watching the game in the combat log to see if anything comes up that matches its conditionals or triggers. If they're not loaded, they are not. That means they are not using any resources and are just waiting until their global load conditions are met. What I mean by global load conditions is actually this load tab here. This is the conditions that decide whether the aura is loaded in the memory and is waiting to see if its triggers match anything. Just as a quick overview here, what I'm using is the class specialization load rule, so that this set of auras only loads when I'm using an assassination rogue. If I was to switch to a different spec or a different class, this set of auras would go into not loaded, and if I have auras made for that spec and class, it would come into loaded. So moving on, we'll do an overview of the different tabs. These are all the settings that apply to an aura. So we'll come in here to my Sin Rotation group and look at Crimson Vial, which is similar to what we just programmed in Excel. Go to Trigger and Health, and this is what it looks like when you move that same formula into an aura. It's the same kind of idea. The trigger is the conditional, and what we're doing is comparing two values: the player's health, which is what these settings are. So the trigger type is player unit info. The value we're looking for is health, and the unit we're targeting is the player. There are other units in here, so you could watch, for instance, the target, or you can pick various units in the raid, the party, or even a specific unit by name. When you hover over these, they do give you a little more detail about what all that means, which is useful. But if we're going back to that same formula, then what I'm saying is if my player's health hit 60% or below, then return true. What we're going to look at next is the required for activation section. All triggers means that all these triggers have to have returned true, so all their conditionals have to be met. Any triggers means that any one of these triggers, so you could have 5 or 6 triggers here, and as long as one of them returns true, or at least one, it will tell the aura that the entire batch equals true. Custom is a little more tricky. It's programming you can put in there that allows you to ask if multiple things are true or not, or false. So you could say, in order to see this for real, we'll go to something where it's actually using it, which is my garrote. And here's another example of that formula. And here's the triggers I have programmed for garrote. Let's go through them. So the first one here is checking if garrote is usable. I like to use action usable rather than cooldown, because this will actually watch to see if the action is just usable. It could mean that it has enough energy if you're a rogue, enough combo points if it takes combo points to use. It will check also if you're stunned and can't even use the ability, then it won't show up, so you're not sitting there spamming a keybind that you can't use. There are occasions where it's better to use cooldown, but for the most part you're good using action usable. The next one is trigger 2. It's watching my combo points and what it does is check if I'm at 4 points or lower, because garrote generates a combo point. You don't want to waste the combo point, so you don't use it unless you're at 4 or lower. Or 3 is checking if my target has garrote or not. Or missing means that it's not found, means that my target does not have garrote on them. Or 4 is checking two things. 1 is the aura found, meaning that they have garrote on them, and 2, how much time is left. If it's at 6 seconds or under, then return true. This is important because of Pandemic. For those who are not aware, Pandemic is a World of Warcraft mechanic where when you refresh a dot, it will use up to 30% of the max timer of the previous dot and add it to the total. So like garrote is an 18-second dot. If you were to use garrote again, it would add up to 30% of 18 onto the buff or the debuff, meaning that you would get 24 seconds of garrote instead of 18. and that's true all the way down to 0. But once you hit that 30% mark, it starts adding less to it. So if you used it with like 3 seconds left, you would only get 21 seconds instead of 24. So it's more effective to use it when you're within that 30% window than it is to try and refresh it when it's all the way full, especially as you want to make sure to fit in other abilities in that time, as much time as possible. So we watch for when it hits that 30% window to say, okay, now's a good time to refresh it. So that flows back to this, and what this is saying is, there are two possible scenarios in which this entire trigger set returns true, which allows the aura to show up. The two scenarios is trigger 1, trigger 2, and trigger 3 returning true, or is trigger 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 4 returning true. So that's an overview of triggers, as well as giving you a little bit of feedback as to how it ties back to the if-then formulas I was showing you. So moving forward, we'll go over the rest of the tabs here. Display is defining how the aura shows up on the screen, as well as its size, its positioning, what other effects it has. A good way to start is to collapse all these so it looks cleaner. We'll go over these now that we've got them collapsed. Icon settings is where you decide what icon is showing for an icon static aura. Right now it's set to dynamic information, and what that will do is go back to triggers and look at this dynamic information here and use that to decide what icon is showing. First active trigger means that the first trigger that is returning true will be used, in which case it's almost always going to be action usable with how I have this set here. You can also change this to one of the other triggers if you prefer, depending on how you have things set up. Or if you have a specific icon you'd like to show rather than whatever is on your triggers, you can choose fallback icon and come into this search bar and search for something. Let's say, just for fun, lightning bolt. It does get a little laggy because it's searching all the spell icons available, which is a lot of them. And then it gives you a list of all the spell icons related to the word lightning bolt, which you can pick from. You pick one and that's the icon that'll show up. The rest of these settings you really won't use very often. Position settings is another one you'll use. This allows you to set the width and height as well as where it's at inside the group that you have set up. The next one would be text and glow. These are elements you can add. For instance, this is how I add the text over top of the icon, such as the E, which tells me that E is my key binding. You can also add glows and more text to it, or borders if you like. Conditions is how you would change things as the aura changes. For instance, if you wanted to set it so that when the death mark timer bar I showed you earlier was done or halfway through, you could use a condition to do that instead of programming so that you have two states for the aura. It's another set of if-thens. So what I'm saying here is, if the aura is still is done being on cooldown, then glow, then have it glow, so that we can tell that it's done, which is where those little pixel tracks going around. That's because of the conditional. If I was to uncheck this and then turn everything back on, the marks are gone. So that's an example of something you can do with conditions. Actions. This is where you would tell it to push a chat message to the window, such as for raid warnings and such, and also how you would have it play sounds. We don't use this much. The place where you see it most would be like if the raid group ones, which we'll go over soon. Animations is where you tell it to move. It's how you tell it to move on the screen somehow. An example is what I showed you earlier with the combo points. That circling is from an animation. So if we go to this one here, we can look at animations and see that I have it set that while this is loaded, which is what main is, rotate left. Load we've gone over. You can set this per group or per aura if you want. For instance, I've got this entire group of auras set to load whenever I'm using a rogue, because it is combo points is something all rogues have. Custom options, you won't usually see that unless you run across a really advanced aura that has custom programming in it. I have one I can show you as an example here, which is called Range Checker. This is a very useful little aura that I can modify and add other conditions to, other triggers to, which checks how many enemies or friendlies are near me based on these two things here. So it's saying trigger when there's one enemy within 10 meters of me. To show you where I've actually, this is my template. This is where I keep it so that I can pull it into other aura groups. But to show you, here's my Shaman's Enhanced Rotation. And one of those places I have it is for Chain Lightning. So what it's saying is that if there's 2 or more targets within 5 meters of me, then call this specific trigger true. And then here's the other triggers that go along with it. So what this is saying is if there's 2 or more enemies near me, and the Maelstrom weapon stacks are at 10 plus, which is above, and Chain Lightning is usable, then show me the Chain Lightning aura. And here's an example. This is the custom code I was talking about. This is all linked back to those parameters under custom. So you won't usually see that unless you've got a more advanced aura like this one. And information is where they put a description as well as how to find it on Wago. Wago.io, WAGO.io, is a repository or database of Weakauras where people post all the auras that they've made, and you can download them using import. When you find something on Wago that you like, you hit export string, come in here and click import and paste it here, and it will install it into your auras. And then you can configure it and move it around as you choose. So that's the basics of all these tabs. Now we're going to go over making a new one. Start with a little quirk about Weakauras is when you click new aura, this is what shows up. There's actually 2 options missing here, which is the groups. The best way to get those to show up, you have to have everything unselected for those to show up. So the best way is to click a group and then click it again to deselect it, and then click new aura. And now we have the 2 other options, which is group and dynamic group. Groups are bounding boxes. You put a box on the screen where you want it, and then you add auras to it so that all the similar auras are under the same group for organization purposes and for setting up like the load conditions and such. And 2, so that when you move the group, all the auras move with it. That gets more important with dynamic groups, but as an example, the combo points is actually a regular group. I set up a bounding box to say exactly where this is the box where I want all the combo points to show up. And then I set the size settings and such from there so that it is attached to that group rather than being attached to the entire screen. The other one here is dynamic groups. Dynamic groups will grow and shrink depending on what auras exist in them. All of these cooldown and rotation groups are dynamic groups. The thing about those is that as auras become active where their settings are appropriate that they get shown, and as they get hidden, the group will shrink and change in size. This allows for priorities. I have set up all my characters with the same system so that everything looks the same while I'm playing. On the right side is always my rotation. On the left, if I close Weakauras so you can see, on the left is always my cooldowns. It's 3 minutes and 5 minute ones are defensive things that you're not going to use in your rotation, but it's still important to know when they're ready. Above that is consumables. These are things like files, food, weapon buffs. That 3 group there it's how I set up all my characters, because I like the idea of doing priority based. So it's a dynamic group, and this sin rotation is that group. So it's priority. The top one will be the first in the group and the bottom one the last. So what happens is as you go through your rotation, as these get shown and hidden, it will actually shift its position in the group so that it's at the top, in this case the leftmost one. The way it's set up is the icon closest to my character is the next one in the highest priority to be used. So like in this, so I can show you how it works a little bit. Like I can toggle, as I toggle the visibility, to tell the system that, hey, this is as if it was being hidden. So if I turn slice and dice off, it removes it. Same thing with Groat. And as you see, the group changes size, but then let's say if Groat needs used, oh, there it is again. It's showing me it needs to be used now. Groups have their own have their own tab called group. It's different depending on which one you use, but for dynamic groups specifically, the grow is the important one. So when you place a dynamic group on the screen, you're saying this is its starting point. And from there, you tell it which way you want to grow as auras get added to it. And it's got all these different options. You can even do like circles around your character if you wanted to. But I found that I like this better so I can focus on the center of the screen and pay attention to what's going on around me so I don't die and I can do mechanics properly. So I've got this set to right. If I was to look at the other dynamic group here for cooldowns, it's set to left. So it grows to the left, meaning that the thing closest to my character is still the highest priority. Another thing to know about groups is these settings are global for the auras inside the group. What that means is if I was to come in here to display and set an option here, it would set it for all these auras inside the group. You could do that if you want, and then if you want to overwrite it for just like one aura for some reason, you'd come into the aura specifically and change the information, and it would change it just for that aura, and the rest of the auras in the group would keep what was set up here under the group itself. Before we go into making some auras, I wanted to go over the triggers with you one more time to give you an idea of what we're looking at as we make them. So I'm going to go to make a new icon aura real quick, just as one to play with so we can look at this. In the trigger menu. So first is the type. That's what is where we start. So aura is your buffs and debuffs. Item would be for any items that is in your inventory or equipped, so you could track its cooldowns, charges left, and things of that nature. The next one to look at is player unit info. This is where you check your power states, your health, your mana, energy, combo points, anything of that nature. The next one is spell. This is where you do tracking for the cooldowns, cast times, and charges, things of that nature. All of these also, except for spell, has the ability to choose targets, which is the unit one here. If you ever were, it gives you a description of what each one does, but to go over it real quick, you can do like the player, your target, which could be a friendly or an enemy. You could do one that checks the entire raid for buffs. You could do one that checks just your party. You can even target specific nameplates or bosses if you know that information. For buffs and debuffs, you get some options here like you can choose the buff type. It says debuff, but if you select buff, it still says debuff, but it works for either one. And the idea is you can check and see if they have a magic buff or debuff on them, so you could, like for instance, if you're on your target, you can know that whether you can use a dispel on them to get rid of that buff. You can also put in the name if you know the exact name or spell ID of the buff or debuff. You can check how many stacks is on it. That's how I track Maelstrom Weapon on my Shaman. So any buff or debuff you get that has that little number icon that goes up and stacks, you can use this to track that as well. So I can see when I have 5 Maelstrom Weapon stacks, which allows me to cast Lightning Bolt, or even up to 10, which is the max. So I know that I definitely need to cast something so I don't waste more stacks. Another setting that's important here is the aura found versus missing. Found tells the system to show the aura if it exists on the target, and it also matches these other options. Missing is what you'll use if you're trying to say, does this thing even exist on the target or on yourself? So you can say, hey, you're missing your poisons, and it'll pop up a graphic and you know to go through and load your poisons up. Another important one here is under auras found is the time, remaining time. That's how you track how much time's left on the buff or debuff, so you can say, well, I've got 10 minutes left on my file, I should probably use it before I start the boss fight in case it lasts for that long. Moving forward, some other ones here. Item. You can check how many of the item you have if you want to know that. You can tell whether you even have it equipped or not. And here's the one you use to figure out whether you've got it in a weapon enchanted or not, which is weapon buffs. Area unit info again is where you check your health and powers. There's a whole bunch of options here. All these work. The one I use most often would be health, for checking for deciding if you need to use a healing potion or ability. And power is how you check for rage, energy, etc. You can click check power type, and then choose the power type here. And then, for instance, when we do the combo point one, I'll pick combo points, and then you can choose power percent, or power deficit. Power is a numerical value of exactly how much power you have. Power percent is like if you wanted to know 60% of your energy left for some reason. Power deficit is a number saying how much you've used versus your max. So if you've used 100 energy, then your energy bar would say 200, but you want to know you've used 100, so you would put equal, greater than, or equal to 100 in here, and it would tell you when you've used 100 or more power. The only place I've ever really used this is for Thistletea, because you want to know when you're not going to waste it by using it. So I set that to 150 for my Thistletea so that I know that's when it's a good time to use it. The next one is spell. For here, you mostly use action usable. Action usable, as I described previously, is better in my opinion than cooldown, because it will tell you whether you can actually use the action, so if you're stunned and whatever, you're not wasting key binding pressings. However, there will be occasions when you need to know exactly how many charges you have, or if a spell is on cooldown or not. For instance, with the way I got Shiv set up, as I showed you before, I have it set up to tell me when it's not on cooldown and it's tied to Kingsbane, because you want to have both charges available when you use Kingsbane. The other important part here is cooldown versus always versus not on cooldown. If you have this set to always, the icon will always be showing. That's when you can have things like you could have it have a timer on it, or you could have it glow or turn gray when it's on cooldown. Things of that nature. Some people like to have the ability always on their screen, and then just have the icon change in some way when it's on cooldown or not on cooldown or ready to be used. On cooldown means that the aura will show while it is on cooldown. This is for if you want to have a timer running so you can see how much time's left on the cooldown. Not on cooldown is the one you use when you want that aura to show when it's no longer on cooldown. This would be used to show it like I do, sort of. It's kind of similar to the action usable, except for this one only does it based on cooldown. So this would be like if you had an ability that was a very high priority to use, and a rogue's a good example. Because of the energy and the combo points, abilities are constantly fluctuating between usable and not. So if you want to just know, hey, this is not on cooldown anymore, and you need to spam it because it's got to be the very next thing you use when you have enough energy to do so, that's what you would use this for. Now, to get into making these auras, I'm going to actually do a new one for rogue combo points to give you an example how to put one together. So we'll get back to where we can do a new aura group. Again, this is just a static group because we want them to stay in the same place and we don't want it to change at all. So you give the group a name, and then you click on the group, and it shows you a list of new auras again. And in this case, we want textures. The best way to do it, in this case, I already know that we're going to do a specific texture because we're going to do the Sharingan style thing again. So we want 5 textures in here, 1 for each combo point. So I just call it CP1. And then we go up here to display and texture settings and texture, click choose, and then we're going to go find that set of auras again, textures I mean, starting with 5-part ring 1. That's our CP1. And then I like to give it the color red because it kind of matches with the whole DPS vibe. From there, we can create duplicates in order to get what we need for the rest of the textures, so that everything kind of matches. So you right click the CP1 and click duplicate. It makes a new one, and you just give it a new name. This one automatically put the 2 on the end for us, so that works. And then you duplicate again, and again, and again, because we know we're going to need 5 of them. One, because at 5+ combo points, you're going to use your finisher. You don't want to wait till 6, because you've got some things that could cause it to jump over 6, and you'd be wasting combo points. So now we have the same texture and color on everything. We go CP2, choose the next part of that texture pack, which is ring 2, and then do that for the rest of them. So we got 3 and 4. Now here's where we're going to get a little different. When we hit 5, we want that entire ring to show up because we're going to rotate it to make it a little more dramatic so we know what's going on. So instead of choosing part 5, you would actually choose a ring full. So you have all 5 markers on there. And then for this one, we also want to spin. So you go to animations and main, which is telling it, hey, when this thing's loaded, when its triggers are true, I want you to do this animation. So you choose preset, and I like to use the cert rotate, which is this one. You can also, there's some other ones here, like you can have it flash or even bounce up and down if you want. Here's an orbit. That's kind of cool looking. There's pulse. There's another version of orbit in the other direction. You can have a wobble. Yeah, there's a couple different things here. I like rotate left for this one because it kind of matches with the texture a little bit there. The next thing we have to do is go through and define all the triggers. So in this case, this is supposed to be for tracking combo points. So we choose player unit info, power for player, power type is combo points. And then we want to do power is greater than or equal 1, and power is less than or equal to 4. And the reason for that is that if we were to have all 5 of these shown at the same time, there would be duplicates on the screen like that. So we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have that 5th ring showing there that's circling or rotating, but it's also overlapping the old textures. And to make that look clean, we want to make it so those other 4 hide when the ring's up and available. So we have to set it so that when there's 4 or so that when it goes over 4 combo points, the texture hides. But we won't. But we do want it to show while you've got 1, 2, 3, or 4 combo points. It's a similar thing for the next one. So we go to the triggers again, and do again the player unit info, power, player, power type is combo points. And then we set the power on this one to greater than or equal to 2 and less than or equal to 4. Now that we've done those two, I'm going to show you another thing we can do. You can right click if there's an OR you want the settings, then just copy them to a different one. You can do that. Right click and click copy settings trigger. You can do everything if you want, but in this case we just want the trigger settings copied. So you copy settings trigger, and then right click where you want to move it to and click paste trigger settings. We can do that to the next 2 so that they get that same trigger, so you don't have to go through the initial setup again. In this case we're on CP3, so we'll change that to 3. And CP4, we can actually change this to equals 4 and backspace that out, and that will do the same thing as if we had put greater than or equals 4 and less than or equals 4. CP5, we can actually we can copy that trigger down again. So let's do that. Copy trigger, paste. In this case, we wanted this to be greater than or equal to 5 because we want this to start at 5, but it's possible we might go up to 6 or even in some cases 7 combo points depending on your talent choices. Now we have this done. Let me hide my original one here so that one doesn't get in the way. By selecting never there like I did, that means that it will stay unloaded for good. There's no way it could be loaded into memory. So now we got rid of the one I made originally, and here now we have this little one to look at. So to test it, we're going to go into a fight here. I finally start generating combo points. It should. Yep, there it goes. There's a little bit of setup there to get my rogue going. Sorry about that, but now that I'm generating combo points, you can see the animation working there. When I use Envenom, it used all 5. It goes away. Grow gives me 1 point. Ambush gave me 4, so there's 5 again. And we go through the rotation. There's Ambush gave me 3 and 6. There's 3 again. So that was how the combo point system works. Now that was just a fun way to do it. You don't have to use this graphic. In my case, I like to program everything into that rotation setup. So if we go in here and look at Envenom, for instance, and its triggers, I actually have it set to track combo points inside the ability itself. So Envenom will not show up on my rotation set until I'm at 4 combo points or more, and that's because of the way that assassin rogues have an ability that when you use a finisher, you can get combo points back. Same thing with Rupture. It waits till I have enough combo points to be a finisher, but that way I don't need the red circle. It's a fun graphic. It's fun to look at, but you don't necessarily need it. You can program it right into the other ores. The next two we're going to make here are the progress textures and bars. So same thing again here. We're going to go and get to where we can do a new item, and we're going to do a progress bar. Here, put it into a group. So that gives me an opportunity to show you that if you want to take something out of a group, is to use these arrows here. You have to press this little left arrow that ungroups, and it moves it out of the group that it's in. If you want to put it into a group, you can left click and drag it, and it goes, when the group gets highlighted, it will drop it in there if you let go of the mouse button. So you have to ungroup again. So I'll go back and hide this Deathmark aura since we won't need it. I'm also going to hide the combo points to make it a little cleaner, so we can work with what we got here. So Deathmark. Oh, turn that view off so that they're all hidden. There we go. When I named the aura Deathmark, it automatically added the name to this part here. Progress bar is a little different than the ores we've been looking at. Instead of just being a static icon, it actually has a timer bar with 2 text settings on it. One is its %P, which if you look at the display text here, it actually gives you hints as to what to put in there to get different values to show up. Those values tie back to the triggers or to the name of the aura. For instance, %P is the progress time remaining value. The remaining time of a timer or a non-timer value. In this case, it's showing a time as a template, kind of just to show you, its purpose is to show you how it could work. But since we don't have anything triggered in there, if I turn Weakauras off so that everything loads, see, it just says sign a battle, and it's does not have a timer on it. If we add under triggers, spell, cooldown, we want cooldown this time because we're actually trying to get a hold of the time left on the ability. And we type Deathmark in here, and then turn Weakauras off. See, now it's hidden because I had that on cooldown turned on. If I change this show to always, now it's there at all times, and it's showing blank because the ability is not on cooldown. If I were to go use it, see, now it's giving me the timer with the red bar, so we can see how much time is left, as well as a visual representation with the bar moving. And that name comes from, let me see here. Yeah, that name is now coming from the name of the spell rather than the aura. While we're in here, I want to show you one other useful feature. If you open up your spell book and find the thing you want to add to it, so let's blank this out so you can see, and click in here, click in spell, so you have the little blinking mark there. Hold shift and left click on the spell from your book, and then click OK, and it will find it for you, so you don't have to type it if you don't want to. And then because it's progress bar, we have a couple other options in here. The bar color gradient start is actually the color of the bar that's moving there. The background color is this black color in the back. Right now it's set to transparent, but you could set it to something else. For instance, if we wanted to do blue for the background, we could come in here, change the color wheel, and change the hue of the color. Click OK, and now the background's blue. So we have the red bar going across a blue background. You can also click Enable Gradient if you want to look a little fancier. See, now it's more of a yellow to red. The next thing is this orientation. You can change which direction the bars are moving. So like you can do left to right instead. You can even do vertical. So it's moving from bottom to top that way, or we can do top to bottom, depending on how you want that set up. You can also change the text if you want to, like how in vertical it's a little difficult to read there. So we can go to the text. And then these gears are actually additional options. So for instance, anchors would be its position on the bar. So we open up anchors and you have these settings here. You can do offset to move it, to move the text a little at a time here. See, there's the timer we're moving. Text 2 is the actual name, so we can move it as well. So we can move Deathmark over so it's on the left, and if we wanted to, we could move the timer so that it's on the right of the bar. Or we could use the Y offset to move it up and down. So if we wanted that below, we could move it around till it gets there. You can also use these anchors here. Like if I wanted it, what it does is it says where is the 0 position for X and Y. So where is if I change this back to 0, you can type in here as well as use the arrows if you know the number you like. You see how I moved it down there. Now if I change bottom to, let's say, center, it moves it back to the middle. And then top, for instance. You also have these other like top left, bottom right, etc. You can also give it some like outline if you wanted to make it a little more like a black outline there, so it's a little more readable. And you can of course change what it says. So if you don't want to use, for some reason you don't want to use the name that came with it, we can actually change this display text. It does not have to be a percent. It does not have to use the percentages. So you could do like DM, for instance, for Deathmark, and do a shortened version. So that's a progress bar. We're going to hide that now and move on to the next one, which is a progress texture. So we're going to go change the load settings on this to never, so that it's hidden. So we're going to go find our progress texture, which is grow out, and then we're going to, I'm actually going to delete this one to show you. So you right click grow out and click delete and click yes on this. It's letting you know that it will not be undone. There's no undo function. There's no saving. If you do this, it's gone. So don't do this unless you're sure you're never going to use it again, even if you might need the triggers you set up in it at some point for a different aura. You never know. So in this case, I know I won't need it. So I'm going to hit delete and it's gone. So we're going to do a progress texture, new aura, progress texture. We'll call it grow because that's what we're going to track with it. First thing you want to do is pick what texture you want to use. So we go to progress texture settings and foreground texture. And it's the same set of textures we were looking at before. In this case, I kind of like the idea of the blood drop to go with corrode. So we're going to find that again in here. I believe it's in this one. There it is. And click OK. The foreground color is the color that will show up when the timer is running. The background color is what will be behind that color. So if we choose red here, which is what I like to use, it turns red, and then as the timer decreases, you'll see it's starting there already. There's a bit of a grayish white color there. It's got the same thing as the progress bar where you can choose which directions it's going. You can even have it do like a clock face kind of thing. But bottom to top, or top to bottom, works for what we're doing here. So we're going to move the triggers here and start working on the triggers for it. In this case, it doesn't need to be as complicated as just the aura that goes into the rotation, because all we're worrying about is tracking the debuff timer. So we'll do aura, and we want to check the enemy, so we do target and debuff, and we know the name is Garrote. So we type that in, hit OK or enter. And then we leave the rest of this alone because all we are worried about is grabbing the time left on it, which will happen automatically. From there, we can put this where we want it. It's just a left click and drag, which we'll go over here soon. And that should be it. So we'll close this down so that it's hidden. And again, if you want it to be always on screen, that's up to you. You just click on always instead of aura found, and it will show up. Now, if we go on here and hit Garrote on this guy, it should You see the texture moving? It's moving from bottom to top now instead of top to bottom, but it is doing what it's supposed to, is timing out Garrote. And if you watch 4 seconds, 3, 2, 1, and there, Garrote is now off the enemy and it's turning back to red because it's setting itself back to its default state. You can add text if you want. So if we wanted to add a timer to it, we hit add text. And in this case, we want to know progress, so we change this to %P. And it gives us a timer here, which we can change. Again, we can change its positioning like we did before. So anchors bottom, for instance, we'll put it under the texture. And that would be how you set up a progress texture. The last thing I'm going to show you here is a little bit about moving auras around on your screen so you can get them in the position you want. A good one to start with is the combo points. I pulled back my original ones so that they're the size I want. But so an easy way to do it, if you select which one you want. So in this case, I got the entire rogue combo point group. I can left click and just drag it around the screen. The little lock icon does 2 things. It shows you, one, where the center of the current aura that you're dragging around is, and also this other one is locked to the center of your screen, so you can always know where the center of your center is at, and you can move, and it shows the coordinates like this, your X and Y offsets there. And if you move it back, it'll change to 0 and disappear. And you overlap the two to show that you're back at 0, 0. The other way to do it is you also have this under position settings. See there, it shows your X and Y offsets. You could change these to zeros yourself, and it puts it back to center. The other options you have under groups, especially the static group, is these ones where you can change the alignments. You could set scale if you wanted to increase and decrease it directly from the group. You can also change the spacing. In most cases, you'll want things just left at 0 here, though, so that things line up properly and don't overlap weirdly. The next thing is display. This is where you set the aura's size itself. You can use that scale setting if you want, but I prefer to use this position setting here, the width and height. Generally, when you're doing these texture packs, it's best if you leave them at 0, 0 position and then set them all to the same width and height. And what that'll usually do is it will create the texture pack. Whoever draws them builds them in such a way that they look nice together at a certain spacing. And by keeping the width and the height the same across the board, the spacing stays the way the original designer intended it. You can also do, if you wanted to rotate, the way one of these looks, for instance, let's go to CP1 there. You can do full rotation, allow full rotation, and click this and change this position yourself. And that rotates it around the center of the aura. Same thing here, you can mirror it. And you can also change its transparency with this alpha setting. That's the main parts there. And again, you can add text and models to it. And then you can left click and drag this one aura around if you want. And what'll happen actually is if we go back and click that, see it changed the bounding box of the group in order to include that aura or that texture. And now it's way outside the rest of the texture pack there. So we go back to CP1 and we use the offsets again and change that to 0 and 0, and it should put it back in place. There we go. Before we dive into translating an entire rotation into auras, I wanted to go over a couple of little things here. One is these. These are very useful. They're raid or packs that you can download from wago.io. What it is as people are progressing through the PTR, there are actual developers out there who are building auras for these Race to World Force groups. And after the PTR is done, they'll release them on Wago for other people to download. Me and several others in my raid group all download these. They have very useful information as you're fighting to help you keep your eyes on the screen rather than watching for buffs and debuffs and things of that nature. The other thing I wanted to show you is this part here. We're going to go back to that range checker where I kind of went by that LUA code pretty fast last time. This is Blizzard's programming language. It's called LUA. It's what Blizzard provides so that add-on developers can connect to its various data streams. It doesn't actually change any data. All it does is read it so that it can tell what's going on in game and do different actions based on that. So this is that range checker. I wanted to show you this to let you know that it is possible to learn this. And a lot of times the best way to start is to think, okay, what is one thing on it I'd like to change, and see if you can make it happen. For instance, with this range checker, I needed to change something in order to make it so that for my shaman, it would only activate certain things if I currently had one target around me. Its default code, which is, I already know which part it is, it's this part here, is set for greater than or equal to that enemy counter that's on the custom area. So it's this right here. So its default is to say greater than or equal to this number. However, because I know where it came from, well, I could go into this code and change it to say equals. So now it only activates if I have exactly one target within range. So that's the way I learned it. One of the best ways I learn anyways is to grab something like this and say, hey, this is something I wanted to learn myself, and I have this one little change I'd like to make to it, so let me play with it and see if I can figure it out. You can take this back though to even basic auras. So like if you find something on Weakauras that you're interested in, you want to learn how they did it, you could download an aura from them and go into its settings, its triggers as such, and read through it and see if you can understand why they made that choice, and then use that in your own aura creation and editing. So that's how I learned a lot about Weakauras. You know, I found out about Weakauras a few years ago when I came back to WoW during late BFA, early Shadowlands. And I'm a IT guy. I'm a programmer. I enjoy doing that kind of work and working with the languages and stuff. It works with my brain. So I decided I was going to learn it myself, and it clicked with my brain because of the way it's if-then conditionals, which is similar to most programming. So I learned it, and through that, I've also been able to help a lot of people with making auras for them to make it so they can play their characters easier, or edit even these boss ones to make them a little more fun for people. Like I changed the one for Razagat's breath to say garlic breath back then, from there we're going to start talking about programming an entire rotation into an aura, how it translates over. I'm going to start by saying that I'm not a top 1%er. I'm not even a top, like, probably 1,000 at this point. I play the game to have fun and hang out with my friends and raid. And what I do in game, what I'm capable of doing, I balance that against the stress, honestly, involved in trying to do better than what I'm capable of. So I don't care so much about trying to do another 10 percentage points on parses on Warcraft logs, or trying to get that, eke out that 1,000 more DPS. So I may sometimes make some suboptimal choices. I may sometimes choose a talent point that's a little bit different because I wanted to reduce button bloat, or I don't like the way the spell feels to use on my rotation. But I still do the best I can while still maintaining my fun quota. without all the extra stress. So I wanted to lay out that disclaimer just to let you guys know who I am and what I do with this game, so you know where I'm coming from when I make these videos and trying to help people. So I do have a friend who asked me to make him some outlaw Weakauras, specifically for M+. So what we're going to start with is changing the outlaw, and then I usually use Wildhead to start with. They do a decent job of it, so I went to Wildhead and exported its talent string for M+ outlaw. So I'm going to import it. I usually just call it Wildhead so I know where it came from. Whoops, that's actually for the string. This is the name. And then that gives me a starting point. I'll let this load. And then from here, what I'll do is I'll go through Wildhead's rotation that they have for this specific talent build and read over it and see about translating it into Weakauras. This way to do that is to go to the rotation guide and kind of read this over and think about how it would play into the if-then system with a priority list. So for instance, we go to the single target priority for the N+, and read this over, and it says Blade Fury is supposedly the #1 thing to use when you have 2 or fewer seconds remaining on its duration. So in this case, that translates to a trigger that would say that you would use that would track buffs. You would track your player buff because Blade Fury shows up as a buff, and you would have it say less than or equal to 2 seconds. So that would be an icon or that we would make and add it to a rotation group. Roll the Bones, that's another one. 2 or fewer buffs or 2 or fewer seconds remaining on its duration. So you would, in this case, you would probably be better off erasing this part, or at least I would, given the way I like to play, and just focus on this part. And the reason is, honestly, I don't like Roll the Bones. I don't like keeping track of all those buffs. It's stressful, and it's not necessarily something I enjoy doing. I know many out there would probably disagree with me, but it doesn't meet my quota. But you could, if you wanted to, go through and find all the Roll the Bones buffs and program them into the aura so that it tracks how many of the buffs you have. As a trigger, each buff would have to be its own trigger, and have it set that and use the custom one, and yeah, use the custom version with the programming triggers I showed you, and have it track and see if there's 2 or fewer buffs up, or is there 2 or fewer seconds remaining on its duration. On cooldown at or below 2 combo points. In this case, you would use a cooldown trigger, or action usable trigger, to see if Adrenaline Rush is usable, and then a second trigger that said if you were at 2 or less combo points. Blade Rush at 30 energy or lower, do not cast during subject future Shadow Dance. So you would have Blade Rush as action usable. The second trigger would be tracking your energy to see if you're at 30 energy or lower. And then you would have a couple of, I think, buff ones. Can still be used for 3 seconds after stealth breaks. Yeah, I believe that shows up as a buff, so you'd have 2 different buff triggers checking to see if these 2 are currently on you or not. So that would be an aura missing tracker. You would want those auras to miss. You would want those auras and buffs to not be on your character, so you would set those to aura missing. Ghostly Strike on cooldown. This ability is off the GCD. In my case, I like to use macros. I want to make a separate video going over macros at some point, but in this, for anything that's off the GCD, I would, especially something that's used on cooldown, I would rather set it into a macro and tie it to something I'm spamming, so I know that it will get used as soon as it's off cooldown and it's one less ability I have to press. So I wouldn't even put that in an aura. I would put it in a macro, and it would say it would be a macro that does /cast Ghostly Strike and following /cast whatever spam ability you're going to use. Sinister Strike, for instance. I might even tie it to more of them and do like maybe Between the Eyes and Ambush and Dispatch, just to make sure it gets used when it's on off cooldown. Vanish followed by Between the Eyes at 6 or more combo points. Okay, Between the Eyes has a cooldown, so this one is a little easy to set up. You would set up an aura for Vanish that says is Vanish usable, which is the action usable again under spell, and then Between the Eyes at 6 or more combo points. Okay, so what you would do is you set up an aura that tracks the buff that watches the cooldown for Between the Eyes under spell, and says is this on cooldown. You wouldn't use action usable in case you would actually use the cooldown for this one. You would have it set to say is on cooldown, and then you would have another aura trigger that says do you have 6 or more combo points. Shadow Dance followed Between the Eyes at 6 or more combo points. So this is the same thing I think the idea is here they want you to use Vanish in order to trigger Subterfuge, and then Shadow Dance to trigger so you can use the stealth abilities again. So actually, this tells me that you would not want to use Shadow Dance unless Vanish was on cooldown. So for this one, you would have essentially the same auras as the Vanish one, except for you would have, say, is Shadow Dance usable instead of is Vanish usable. You would also have another aura in there that says, sorry, that says is Vanish usable, and then you would is Vanish on cooldown, similar to the one from Between the Eyes. On cooldown if at 6 or more combo points during something. This is a big one. So Between the Eyes on cooldown if at 6 or more combo points during Subterfuge or Shadow Dance, finish at 5 or more. Hold if Vanish has 45 seconds or fewer on its cooldown. Hold if Shadow Dance has 15 seconds or fewer on its cooldown. Okay, this one's gonna take a few triggers. So you would do first action usable in Between the Eyes, so you know that it's usable. And then you would have the second aura, probably say it would be the combo point one. You would actually have two separate auras for this. I would do one aura for the 6 points and one aura for the 5 points. So the first aura for 6 points would be this part here, if at 6 or more combo points. And then you'd have another trigger inside that 6 combo point one that says that would track Vanish's cooldown, not action usable, but actually cooldown on this case, and set time remaining 45 for equals than or equal or greater than 45 seconds. And then another trigger that says for a cooldown again for Shadow Dance 15 seconds or greater. And then you would have a 5.1 as well right next to each other on the priority list that you would add triggers to check if you had Subterfuge or Shadow Dance buffed on you. So you would have triggers there. I think in that case it allows you to do or for more than one buff. So you could do during Subterfuge, or you could have one trigger that says Subterfuge or Shadow Dance is present on your character. Next is Slice and Dice, and it says Slice and Dice if at 6 or more combo points and has 12 or less seconds remaining. Do not refresh during Subterfuge or Shadow Dance. So in this case, you could do an aura trigger or a power trigger that says that you have 6 or more combo points, and then you would do one that is tracking the buff of Slice and Dice. You could do an aura one there that says that you have 12 or less seconds remaining on the time. I would also probably do one here that checks if the aura is missing, which means you're into doing the custom functions. And then also 2 auras, one that checks if you have Subterfuge or Shadow Dance currently buffed. The next one is Dispatch for 6 or more combo points. That's 2 trigger one, Dispatch usable, and 6 or more combo points. Again, I like to always lead with the spell usable one whenever I can, unless it doesn't make sense to for some reason. So that I know that if I'm stunned, I'm not going to be sitting there spamming the key. I might have something else I can press, or if I'm in the air, or, I don't want to be spamming keys unless I can actually use the ability. So it's it cleans the UI up and keeps you from hitting that when you could be hitting something else. Ambush if you have Audacity or in Subterfuge or Shadow Dance at 5 or less combo points. See, Audacity, half cost uses a pistol shot, have a 30% chance to make your next ambush usable without stealth. Chance to trigger this effect matches the chance of your signature strike to strike an additional time. Okay, so what's going to happen here, this Audacity will actually turn your ambush from not usable to usable as far as the Weakauras is concerned, so you don't even have to track whether this Audacity gets triggered or not. And ambush is only usable when stealthed, so that actually covers these two as well, because these are basically the same idea. They're enabling the use of ambush. So you would have a 2 trigger aura here just saying is ambush usable, and seeing if you have 5 or less combo points. Pistol shot if you have opportunity at 5 or less combo points. And opportunity has a viciously strike. Okay. viciously strike an enemy, causing damage. It's a 35% chance to hit an additional time, making your next pistol shot half cost and double damage. Okay, I'll have to test this when we go to actually translate this over, but my guess is this is going to make your pistol shot glow. So this gives us an opportunity to use something else. There is a trigger that will watch for the button to glow, as in has an extra effect on it. So rather than having to track the buff, we can actually track that, and then we'll have a second trigger that says another trigger that says, do you have 5 or less combo points? And then last is Sinister Strike at 5 or less combo points. That's Sinister Strike usable, and then a second aura that says 5 or less combo points. So that's the entire single target rotation and priority programmed right there. We went over it all just quick here. I didn't actually put it into auras just to go over how each one would translate. We're going to scroll down to the AoE rotation and take a look at it. And it doesn't look to be different at all from the single target one. I could be wrong, but it looks similar enough that we could probably just use single target rotation to cleave in AoE situations without issue there. Probably because of Blade Fairy. And then we move on through the down to outlaw cooldown usage to see if there's any cooldowns we need to worry about. Adrenaline Rush looks like it's probably the only one, and that's used on cooldown, so we'll check if that's on the GCD or not when we go back to the game. Shadow Dance and Vanish is listed here. These two spells have a very similar functionality in enabling the strongest talent in the Outlaw Rogue tree, Crack Shot. You want to make sure to use Vanish before Shadow Dance, as Rest Display is extremely powerful. During these damage windows, you want to make sure you're only casting between eyes to finish and ambush to generate. Okay, well, we kind of got that already set up in the rotation, so the only thing we got to worry about there is Adrenaline Rush. So we're going to go back to the game now. We'll actually pull this window to my second monitor and turn it off so that you can see the game. And I can use it to program the rotation, and we're going to go through how that works now that we've done an overview. So, let's first check that Adrenaline Rush. There's Adrenaline Rush. We're going to click it and see what happens. Okay, it is not on the GCD, so we can macro that. So we go macros, and we want to put it on something we're going to be using a lot, so I would go with Ambush and Sinister Strike. We'll have to set these bars up as well. So let's do, okay, I do not have one for that, so let's do new macro, call it Ambush. I'm going to do show tooltip Ambush, and what this does is makes it so that when you hover over it, it uses Ambush's information for the tooltip as well as the Ambush's icon. And next we'll put in cast Adrenaline Rush, which will tell the macro to use Adrenaline Rush if it is available. I'm going to show you can also do the shift click again, so if you find Adrenaline Rush in here, which it's probably under Outlaw, you can find it, left click so you get that blinking cursor, then come in here and shift left click the ability and it puts the macro in there for you. So we can take out the one I typed in to make sure it's typed in correctly. And then we also want to put in Ambush so that it will try and use Ambush after Adrenaline Rush. So we click in here to get the blinky and shift left click. And that's our Ambush macro done. So then we can take that and drag it out here and put it in place of Ambush, which is right there, and just take Ambush off our bars. And given that this is a rogue, that first bar is likely to change when you just go in stealth, so it's probably a good idea to hit stealth and then put that in there as well. And that way, whether you're in stealth or shadow dance, it will give you the ability to press ambush on the same hotkey. To go over it real quick as we edit these bars, this is how my bars are set up. It is linked to a gamepad I use called an Nostromo, which I will show you real quick. It's a gamepad that uses, it's basically like the first quarter of the keyboard. Q through R, A through F, and Z through C are on there, as well as a D-pad on the side that I use for movement, arrow keys. So it's set up in groups. It's 4x3 to match the Nostromo keypad I have. So like that's how I have my key binding set up. So these first 3 sets of buttons here, you know, it's just the button itself, and then shift, and then alt. So that's what I'll be using as we go through and set these auras up. We have to get our action bars set up a little bit so that we know where abilities are at when we go to the test things. So for instance, by following the rotation, we know which abilities we're going to be using a lot. From reading this over, I can tell that we're going to be using Ambush and Sinister Strike and Pistol Shot, I believe, is the 3 like fillers, I would call them, the main ones you kind of use when you don't have energy or combo points built up or any buffs going. We can take Blade Rush off. That's not actually usable. We can also take Adrenaline Rush off there because we know that it's going to be fired with macros, which we actually should probably make a couple more that fit with the other filler abilities. So we're going to make another one for Sinister Strike. Do the same kind of macro so we can actually make it a little easier and come in here and copy this with Control-C and find our Sinister Strike we just made and paste it in there, and then just change Ambush, Sinister Strike. You can also do the finding into the book and shift clicking again if you prefer. We'll do one that way. We can take this and back that out and shift left click. Then we can actually, to make sure everything's spelled correctly, take this, copy it, and drop it in here like so, and save that and move it and replace it again like so. And then we need another one for Pistol Shot, which is our other filler. So we put Pistol Shot in there. We're going to do the same thing again where we copy this over so we have the basics of the macro in there. And then we'll come in here and do the shift click thing again. Make it a little easier. And then copy this and overwrite this. And then save and clean that. Stealth again and double check that we have the macros in there. We will end up needing a second Sinister Strike, so I'll go ahead and pull that over. So from here, I kind of like to set it up for me. The FDS is my fillers, and then R, E, and W up here are kind of like finishers. That's how I do most of my classes, so we're going to set that up across so that, you know, S for Ambush is most likely going to be, it's a filler, but it's not going to be used as often because it requires stealth and buffs to hit. Our Sinister Strike is going to be used quite often, and then we got Pistol Shot. And then our finishers here, our damaging finishers, are going to be Dispatch in between the eyes. From the look of it, we don't really use Shiv as outlaw, so we can go ahead and take that off. And we could put something else in there, and looking at the rotation again, it looks like Roll the Bones might be a good candidate for that slot, because we have things that reduce the cooldown on that, and we're going to want to make sure we use it and it's easily accessible. Let's see, anything else that would be good for that first, like not having to press Shift or Alt section. Shadow Dance we could put over there just to give it a slot that's easier to reach. The rest of this, it looks like that's all what I would call the rotational abilities. I do not think there's anything more that we need to put over there. So we're going to pop out of Stealth and then come in here to our spellbook and try to make this match up. So we need to move Ambush, Sinister Strike, Ghostly Strike we're going to put in macros. Line we don't need there. And we need another Shadow Dance. So we go grab that. Put that on C. And part of the reason I like to set this up the same across all characters is I usually put my movement ability of whatever sort on Q. Like, so that's sprint in this case. and any kicks or spell interrupts go on A. And then, like, what I call special movement abilities, like for instance, the Shaman's Ghost Wolf or the cat forms, a Druid cat form stealth or a rogue stealth goes on Z. X is usually AoE for me, so that's where Blade Flurry sits. C is kind of like an extra slot for something I might use on cooldown. I might use as part of my rotation, so I don't have to go hitting shift or alt that often. Following that, other things we'll need for the rotation, slice and dice. It's not going to be used very often from what I can see on here. We may end up moving that to C and swapping it with Shadow Dance. We'll see. The rest of this is all extra fluff. Stuff we don't really need for the rotation, so we're going to ignore that for now. But we do need to go and add that Ghostly Strike, which is not... It says it's off the GCD, so we'll test that real quick. Yes, it's off the GCD, so we can add that to our macros. The same ones here. So we just add a line, grab Ghostly Strike, and shift click that in here. And save that, and then go to the pistol shot and do the same thing. And because these are off the GCD, what'll happen is the macro will actually use them if they're available. And then if they're not available, it will drop down and use pistol shot. Because it's not on the GCD, so it's not on Blizzard's internal little macro blocker. Blizzard has it blocked so that multiple abilities on the GCD cannot be in the same macro. If they're off the GCD, you're free to put them in there. So that makes the rotations a little easier because of things like Ghostly Strike, where you're just using it on cooldown anyways. There's really no reason to have to press the button. You just let the macro run it. So that takes care of that. So we have Adrenaline Rush and Ghostly Strike taken care of from the rotation we went over earlier. Next, we're going to go through and program the rest of it in the Weakauras. Now we have buttons set for all this. So we open Weakauras with the /WA. Since I like to have everything look the same, I'm actually going to copy these. So you right-click the group and hit duplicate, and then we'll give it a name. In my case, I like to have this naming convention so I know what it actually is. So this one would be out for outlaw. And then we'll go to load and change this to outlaw, and that should jump it up the load. And that was the CDs we just made, so we need the rotation one as well. So we'll duplicate this and rename it to out again. And then do the load again. And there we have basic setup for what we need to start making these auras. A lot of times you can reuse a lot of these, but we're going to actually not use them. I'm going to do each one from scratch so you can see it. So I'm actually going to go through and delete all these. I may end up grabbing some custom functions out of some other auras later on, but we're going to start from scratch. So first we'll go onto the group and then click new aura and icon to get a new icon aura started. We'll call it Blade Flurry. Now, these aura names have to be unique across all auras, so if I hit enter here, okay, it's going to accept it, but if I had something else called Blade Flurry in here, it would tell me it was a problem. So what I would do then is I would add the word out to the end of it, so that I knew it was the outlaw version of Blade Flurry, but we don't need it this time, so we can just leave it at Blade Flurry. Now, one thing is that you might notice this icon is actually bigger than than what I usually use. So in this case, in order to get the settings correct, I'm going to go up here to the ones we haven't deleted yet, copy settings, display, and then right-click on Blade Flurry and paste display settings. And that will shrink it down and make it look and work the same as the other one, so it's the same size. In this case, we know that Blade Flurry I've got set to X, so we go into display text down here at the bottom and change it to X and hit OK. That makes it so that it looks the same here. Then we go into triggers to set up the triggers for this. I'm going to use action usable. That's my default first trigger for pretty much everything. So we go into trigger 1, change it to spell action usable. And then I'm going to use the spellbook shift click system to make this a little easier. And then we go find Blade Fury in here, get our little blinky, Blade Fury, click OK. And there, that's the first one set up. And we needed, what was the rest of that step? When you have 2 or fewer seconds remaining on its duration. So what we're going to have to do here is click Add Trigger, and we want to track the buff for Blade Fury. So these defaults are correct. Or player buff, name, or name. We might be able to do the shift click here. Let's test that real quick. Blade Fury. Oh, it didn't like it, so we're going to type it in. Blade Fury. Click OK. You'll know it's right when it pops up the little icon here and the OK button goes away. So from here, we want to know when there's 2 or fewer seconds remaining on its duration. So you do remaining time less than or equals to 2. And that's how much time is left on the buff. And then or is found because we don't want this to show up unless we don't want this trigger to show true unless the aura is found and there's 2 or less remaining seconds on the buff. So in this case, we're actually going to need another trigger, or player buff again. Same thing for Blade Fury. And then instead of remaining time, we're actually going to go to auras missing. And what that will say is if the aura is missing, make this trigger true. Another way to do this is we could have done a duplicate, since most of the settings we need are in auras in trigger 2 already. We can go in here and click duplicate, and then scroll to the bottom, which if you look here, it has all the same settings from trigger 2. The only thing we need to change now is aura missing. So you can set it up either way, but both ways work. In this case, we're going to need that custom function, because right now if we leave it like this, that Blade Fury trigger is never going to show up, because we're looking for all triggers to be returned true. And action 1 might return true, or trigger 1 might return true because Blade Fury is usable. However, we'll never reach a state in which both trigger 2 and trigger 3 return true at the same time. There's always going to be one or the other. In this case, that's where we need the we can do this one of 2 ways. We could get rid of the action usable if we really want to, but the problem is that we will probably run into cases where the aura will show up for it, but Blade Fury is unusable because of the cooldown or because you don't have enough energy. So in this case, I think the best way to do it is go back and use the custom functions. Now I'm going to go find one of my custom functions that uses this, that has the formula in there already, and pull it over. So we'll just grab this one, and then I'll explain how this works. So you paste it in there. I always hit accept first so that it saves it, so if you happen to click off, you're not going to lose it. So what this is doing is calling function T, and what that means is it's giving a name to all these triggers. So T is the name. You could actually change T to whatever you want, but I like to use T. And then return is saying, it's asking the trigger whether its conditionals are returning true or false. So return T1 and T2 means what you're doing with this is setting what needs to happen in order for this entire trigger group to return true and for the aura to show up. So what we're saying here is T1 and T2 have to return true, and either T3 or T4 have to return true. Now we've only got 3 triggers here. So the 1, 2, 3, 4 is actually tied to these. So trigger 1 is this one, trigger 2 is this one, and then trigger 3 is this one. We don't have a trigger 4 here, so we're actually going to edit this formula. And then before you do that, though, you always put end at the end to tell the system that you're done with the formula, and it doesn't need to try and process anything else. So in this case, we're going to edit this to work with just our 3 triggers here. So we're actually going to get rid of this and here, and that parenthesis, and T3 as well. Because what we're going to actually ask it is trigger 1 returning true, and is either trigger 2 or trigger 3 returning true. So we move that parenthesis over here before T2, which is trigger 2. It's a little small, so sometimes it's hard to read, know exactly where you're typing. And then we change this 4 to a 3, then hit accept. So now it's asking what we need it to. Is trigger 1 returning true? And is either trigger 2 or 3 true? So now this OR will show up in one of two cases. Either if the first case is trigger 1 is returning true, meaning it's usable, and trigger 2 is returning true, meaning there's 2 or less seconds on the buff. The second case is if trigger 1 is true, meaning it's usable, and trigger 3 is true, meaning that the OR is missing. The reason I set it up like this on this kind of situation is because 2 and 3 are exclusive. There's no way that those same things could happen at the same time. So you set up something like this so that you can cover both scenarios. So moving forward, that's Blade Flurry done. And it's in the right position because it's actually the first thing in our priority. So we're going to move on to doing Roll the Bones now. Now, based on the guide here, it says you want to use it if you have 2 or fewer buffs or 2 or fewer seconds remaining on its duration. Well, that last part's actually a lot like Blade Flurry. So we can start by duplicating Blade Flurry and type that in the Roll the Bones. And we go through and change these 3 triggers. I've just gotten really used to typing it in as I go, but you can use the shift click if you prefer for the action usable, but I do know that for the triggers it prefers you to type it. Now, in this case, Roll the Bones is kind of unique. Somehow Weakauras does know to watch all the buffs that Roll the Bones has to know whether any of them are on you or not. However, if you wanted to do the first part of that rule, which is if you have 2 or fewer buffs, reuse it, you would actually have to program this out a lot. There are 6 possible buffs into Roll the Bones, and you'd have to have an aura that tracks each individual one, and then you'd have to set up all this. You'd have to add you'd probably have to add expand, and probably add about 10, let's see, there's 6 possible buffs. It wants to know if you have 2 or fewer. You'd probably end up with like 60 lines of code between returns, ands, and ors trying to figure that out. It's possible, but it's not necessarily needed for our purposes. It's one of those things where I would probably make the suboptimal choice and just Roll the Bones whenever it's available and just be done with it. So we're gonna leave that there. If you really want to see what that would look like, let me know, and I will expand it out and write it out and send it to you. We can talk about it, or I'll do another video on it. But we're gonna move on for now. Adrenaline Rush, we don't need to touch. That's an off GCD ability, and it is programmed into our macros. Blade Rush is on the guide, but the M plus build we're using does not use Blade Rush, so we can skip that. Ghostly Strike is off the GCD, so that again, that's a macro ability. Now we come to Vanish. So I like to just even when it doesn't quite match up, I still like to duplicate just so I get those display settings the same. So here we can change this to Vanish. See, it didn't like it because so it put it back to its original name because I have Vanish somewhere else. So we can do Vanish and then put out on it so that we know it's Outlaw's version of Vanish. And it says Vanish followed by between the eyes at 6 or more combo points. So in this case, we don't want to use Vanish unless we have 6 or more combo points and between the eyes is available, which has a 45-second cooldown. And the very next thing we're going to mention here because of this is Shadow Dance followed by between the eyes at 6 or more combo points. So we're actually going to want to do this a little different because if we use Vanish or Shadow Dance is better than Vanish because it lasts longer. So you'll end up wanting to use Vanish first and then Shadow Dance, but you don't want to use them at the same time. So we're going to actually program this. Vanish is going to be by itself. It's not going to care whether Shadow Dance is available or not. But when we do the Shadow Dance one next, we are going to put a trigger in there for Vanish. So it looks like we can actually change this to all, and we go ahead and delete these two so that it's cleaner, and change this action usable to Vanish so we then know that it can be used. And then we're going to add a trigger. Followed by between the eyes. We're also, okay, so we want to know if that's usable as well. So let's actually go back and duplicate this and put between the eyes in here so that we know that's usable. And then we're going to add a trigger because now we need to track combo points. So that is actually player unit info, power, player. Power type is combo points, power, and they want to know 6 or more, so greater than or equal to 6. And that is Vanish done. So we're going to go back to display for Vanish and change that to Z because that's where we have the button for it. We should go back and do roll the bones, change that to W. And now we're going to do Shadow Dance. So we duplicate again and put Shadow Dance in there. Didn't like it, so we might as well go. We're going to put the out on it. Go on the triggers. In this case, it's actually pretty similar to Vanish. We just got to change some aura parameters. So instead of actually, we want to keep that. We need the Vanish part. So we're going to duplicate this. Go down to the one I just made and rename that to Shadow Dance. And then use these up arrows to move it so that it's at the top. The reason we're doing this is we want the icon to look like Shadow Dance. In order to get it to update, you click in there and click OK again so that it refreshes this and refreshes the icon. And then for the next thing we want to know is Vanish unusable. That's where we use this inverse. What that says is do the reverse of whatever this trigger is. So right now it's saying return true if Vanish is usable. We want to do the reverse of that. So we click the inverse box and now it will say is Vanish not usable, which usually means it's on cooldown. So that this works for this case. And then the next one is between the eyes, which we still need, and the 6 combo point thing. So that is Shadow Dance done. In this case, we need to change the display to Shift R, or we say no C. So we put a C in there and click OK, and that is Shadow Dance. That is step 7 of our rotation. So we're going to move on to the next step for between the eyes. It says between the eyes on cooldown if at 6 or more combo points during Subterfuge or Shadow Dance, finish at 5 or more. Hold if Vanish has 45 seconds or fewer. Hold if Shadow Dance has 15 seconds or fewer on its cooldown. So what this is saying is there's 2 scenarios where you want to use between the eyes. The first one is if you have 6 or more combo points and Vanish and Shadow Dance have a long time on their cooldown left. The second case is if you're inside Subterfuge or Shadow Dance and you have 5 or more combo points. You can set this up one or two different ways. One is you can set up 2 different auras to cover each case, or you can actually set this up in one aura with a little more advanced custom trigger. We're going to do it that way so you can see what that would get a feel for how that would work if you're going to do the more advanced stuff. So we'll start by duplicating to get those display settings. Rename this to between the eyes. And then we're going to actually delete all these so we can start from scratch and make these auras. So we're going to start by saying is between the eyes usable because it does have a cooldown. Okay, and then add trigger. And the next thing we need to know for this case is how many combo points you have. So we're going to do player unit info, power, player. Power type is combo points. Power is greater than or equals 6. The next thing we need is vanish. We need to know when it has, the guide says 45 seconds or fewer on its cooldown. So what we're actually worried about for calling this aura true is when you have 46 seconds or more on the cooldown left. So we're going to do add trigger, spell, cooldown works is what we'll need for this. Vanish is the spell, remaining time, and we're going to set greater than or equal to 46. And then we need another one for Shadow Dance that says 16 seconds or more on its cooldown. So we do another spell, cooldown, Shadow Dance, remaining time, greater than or equal to 16 seconds. And then the second case for Between the Eyes is if you're inside Subterfuge or Shadow Dance and you have 5 or more combo points. So we need a second power. So we'll actually go back and duplicate this one, which puts it at trigger 5, and just change this to 5. And we also need one that tracks buffs. So we go or player buff name. And luckily we can do an or case on this. So we need to know if we have Subterfuge buff, or if we have Shadow Dance's buff. So we set that up like that and put it on or as found. So that's all the ORs we need to make this work. Next, we're going to do a custom function. We can wipe this out, and we're going to type it in manually here. So the first case that we're worried about is if you're outside of Shadow Dance and Subterfuge, and you can use Between the Eyes. So we're going to start with the parentheses in order to call this case 1. Basic is what we're doing. So T is the name of the trigger, and then you're going to call trigger 1. So T, and then square brackets, and then 1, and T bracket 2, because we're worried about whether you have 6 or more combo points at this point, and T3 to check for that Vanish cooldown, and T4 to check for the Shadow Dance cooldown. So that's case 1, and then we put an OR to say that we're starting case 2 with the parenthesis. And in this case, we want to know, is the spell usable? So that's T1. And do you have enough power, 5 or more combo points to use it? That's T5. And also, do you have Subterfuge or Shadow Dance, which is T6? So that should cover both cases in which Between the Eyes is usable. So again, it's saying 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 5, 6, which is, to go over it again, is it usable? Do you have 6 or more combo points? Is the cooldown on Vanish and Shadow Dance high enough to use it? And then, oops, that's not good. It wiped out because I didn't hit accept. See, that's why we hit accept. So we'll type it out again real quick. T1 and T2 and T3 and T4, or T1 and T5 and T6. That's why we hit accept. So, and then the second case is it usable? Do you have 5 or more combo points? And do you have the Subterfuge or Shadow Dance buff? So that is our Between the Eyes done. We go in here and change the display text now to our key binding. And we move on to the next step, which is slicer dice. Or slice and dice, sorry. So we're going to just duplicate in order to grab those display settings again. Slice and dice. Oh, didn't like it. So we'll call this out. Triggers, we can go through and delete all these. We don't need any of them, except for the first one. And then change this to all, or trigger 1. It's the only one available, so that's what will show up there. Slice and dice is what we're worried about for being usable. And then it says, if at 6 or more combo points and has 12 seconds remaining, do not refresh during Subterfuge or Shadow Dance. And actually, now that I've read over this, we're going to go back and recreate this. Well, we don't need to recreate it. Let me show you another thing you can do. We're going to need this Blade Flurry style aura because slice and dice is a buff, so it has the chance to be either missing or a low remaining time. But we can actually copy it. So copy trigger, and then come in here and paste trigger settings, and it copies the trigger settings. So we'll have to go in here and change these again, slice and dice. And then we'll have to change these two as well. Slice and dice. And slice and dice. And it also wants you not to use it during subterfuge or shadow dance. And okay, we got a couple more hours the triggers to program in here. So let's go over this again. If at 6 or more combo points and has 12 or less seconds remaining, do not refresh during subterfuge or shadow dance. Okay, so what we're going to do is add a trigger to check for combo points. It's the same setup here: player, power, player unit info, power, player. Power type is combo points again, and power greater than or equal to 6. And then we need another trigger to check for that buff, those buffs. So add trigger, buff, name, subterfuge. Change this to missing because we don't want it to show up. In this case, the and will work because we want to make sure they're both missing. So subterfuge and shadow dance are both missing. So that should give us all the auras we need to make this work, or the triggers, I'm sorry, triggers we need to make this work. We got to program another case statement up here. So we got case 1 is if the buff is missing, and case 2 is if the buff has 12 or less seconds remaining. So we need to find where we program that. That is aura 3 and aura 2. So the first case would actually be, is it usable? So T1. And does it have, let's see, what does aura 2 say? Aura 2 is time remaining. So we want to change that to 12 seconds. And we're going to say T2 for that case. And we're going to skip 3 because that's the second, that's part of case 2. So the next ones we need are, we need to know the combo points, that's T4, and whether those buffs are missing. So that's T5. That's case 1. Case 2 is it usable? And is it missing? So that's T3 this time. And do we have enough combo points? That's T4. And I apologize, I tend to look at my keyboard when I type, so that's why I'm looking down so much. T5 for, are those buffs missing? And that should cover both cases in which we want to use slice and dice. I got the name wrong. I put nad instead of and, so we'll fix that real quick. So that should be slice and dice done. Now we just set the key binding for it, which is SR for Shift R. And then dispatch. Step 10 is dispatch. If at 6 or more combo points. Yeah, we're back to simpler ones. So let's duplicate an easier one with a few less triggers here. Just grab this one, duplicate, rename it to dispatch. Move it down with the left click and drag. You should see there's a thin line that shows up under slice and dice out there. That tells me it's going to drop it right below it, but in the same group. So we can delete these, and we can go back to trigger 1, which will change to all when we add more triggers. This one, in this case, we're worried about if dispatch is usable. And add a trigger, and we also need to know if we're at 6 or more combo points, and that's the only rules for this. So that's, we only need these 2 triggers. So we need player unit info, power, player, power type is combo points, power is greater than or equal to 6. And then we change the display, dispatch is on our R key, and there's that one done. Ambush, if you have an Audacity or are in Subterfuge or Shadow Dance at 5 or less combo points. Okay, so we're going to duplicate this, call it ambush. Oh, looks like we need to add the out to it. And we're worried about if ambush is usable. Now, again, ambush has a special case. It is only usable in stealth. And the two buffs that's mentioned here, or the three, I'm sorry, Audacity, Subterfuge, and Shadow Dance all enable ambush to be usable. Subterfuge and Shadow Dance do it because it's technically putting you in stealth, or allowing you to use stealth abilities. Audacity just makes it usable, like it enables it as if you were in stealth. So in this case, we can just say is ambush usable because it makes it, because at that state it is usable. So we don't need we don't need to track the buffs or any of that stuff. And then it wants to know combo points at 5 or less. So we change this to less than and put a 5 in there. Then we go the next one, which is pistol shot. This one we're going to do a little bit of a test on camera. We might have to, after we get after we get this one in Sinister Strike program, we'll do a test to make sure it works. But if I'm correct, having opportunity will cause pistol shot to glow. So we can do something a little different here. Go to spell and do spell activation overlay glow, and then put in pistol shot. And what this should do is if pistol shot starts glowing because of opportunity, then it should cause this to return true, which will allow us to use that for the aura instead of tracking a buff or anything of that nature. And it says at 5 or less combo points, so that one is already set for us. And pistol shot is D. And then we need one. Oh, is it not? Looks like we're not getting our we need to set this to all, not any, for starters. And we're gonna go check and make sure that these other two are still that way. Yeah, see, let's say any, we need that to say all. There we go. Double check the rest of them. Okay, we're back to good. Looks like it did not capture the icon with just trigger one. So what we're going to do, and we actually kind of need to know this anyways because pistol shot does have energy. We're going to add an action usable trigger. It won't cause us to have to put custom in there at all, but it will allow us to use that icon and make sure that we have enough energy to use pistol shot before we try clicking it. So we're going to change this to action usable, put pistol shot in there, and that takes care of that. And then the last one is actually Sinister Strike, our filler, the one you spam when there's nothing else to click. So we put Sinister Strike in here. I have trouble spelling Sinister for some reason. Do it again for action usable. And then we don't need the spell activation this time. What we do need is the 5 or less combo points, which we have set. And this is F. So that should be our entire rotation. This is all programmed, all set up. And again, this is in priority order. So when we start fighting, this is the order they'll show up in the group here. Roll Blade Fury will be closest to my character. Sinister Strike will be the furthest. So we're going to actually close this so that everything turns on and activates, and click our target dummy here. And we're going to start the rotation and see what happens. Now, if we watch down here for pistol shot, it should glow when I trigger that. Oh, there it is. See, it's glowing. And now we got pistol shot up here. That's what that glow does. It's saying I got enough opportunity stacks to use pistol shot. Now, I will say that because I have daggers, some of this isn't working exactly right because it requires swords. Now, I do have a sword here. Let me try equipping it in my main hand and see if it enables a couple of those abilities. Move this over. Looks like I have some embellished problems. Let's see here. That sword is embellished. Where is my other embellished item? To make this like one ring thing with the food, with the well fed on it, or the yeah, the well fed bonus, the flavor packet. I like to make a ring with the flavor packet on it. But that shouldn't count. Where is my other embellished item? Things that have extra effects on it and see what happens. This should let me equip it. There we go. I wonder what it was I equipped that was a problem. That sword and wrist back. Oh, I didn't like the wrist. Okay. Oh, there it is. I'm blind sometimes. I missed the unique embellished thing on the wrists. Okay, we'll leave the wrists off so we can test this and see if it will let me do the rest of the rotation properly now. So let's do Blade Fury, Roll the Bones, Sinister Strike, and there. Oh, it popped up for a second. And something there's not working because after I used Vanish, it told me to use Shadow Dance. But the pistol shot thing is working. See the glows down there on the bottom? That's the activation overlay it's talking about. Ambush glows because of when I'm in Shadow Dance, and Stealth, etc., and Subterfuge. Pistol shot glowing is what we were worried about because that tells us that it's got opportunity stacks to use. I gotta wait till I get out of combat here, and we're going to check out why that these two are not working together nicely. Because what should happen is Shadow Dance should not show up unless Vanish is off cooldown. That's correct, but I think what's happening here is Vanish goes off cooldown and Shadow Dance thinks I should be using that next. So we need to check something here. Unfortunately, we gotta wait 30 seconds, but I think we probably need to add another trigger for Shadow Dance that checks for the buff that Vanish gives us, which I think is called Subterfuge, but we're going to double check that. Fortunately, we've got to wait another 20 seconds, so let's take a look at something here. There's that spell activation overlay. We know that was working. I think the rest of it was all working except for this. Because what should have happened is this should not have shown up until after. Yeah, okay. So there's. Okay, we got Vanish. I'm going to get back in combat and see what happens when I click Vanish. Okay, so there is a buff. So we can track that buff. Okay. And okay, Subterfuge. Okay, so that's the buffs we need to be careful of. We need to make sure we need to add the Shadow Dance and put in a buff tracker for Vanish and Subterfuge. Because we don't want to use one when the other one's active. So we'll put Vanish and Subterfuge, or we want that to be or is missing. So what it will do is add another trigger saying that if Vanish and Subterfuge are missing, then Shadow Dance can be used. And actually, just to cover our bases here, we're going to do another one here as well to say that not only we don't want to line things up to where Shadow Dance buff is running and we use Vanish while that's still running. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to do this and add another trigger to Vanish, and that should fix our problem. So we're going to go into Stealth here and give this another run and see if see how the rotation looks. So we'll go through the rotation, and something's not right. Looks like Ambush showed up, but then it was on the wrong key binding. So we got to fix that. Ambush display. Yep, it's using R. Okay, that is not right. So that's S. And this is why you do the testing after you get this done, because You always find one or two little things that you didn't quite get quite right, and that's okay. It's easy. Most of this is easy to fix. You just keep trying the dummies until the rotation feels right and it feels like everything's working as it should. So we're gonna go back into stealth. We're actually gonna give this 2 seconds to finish the cooldown on vanish, and then we're gonna start again. So X, W, S, Z, E. Okay, that's much better. It's doing what we wanted to. It's doing what we programmed. So that is the rotation for Outlaw Rogue, and it looks like it is done as far as I can tell. And everything feels smooth as far as the key bindings that I have set up. So we will call that good and back off. The other thing, and these are much simpler to program for sure, but we do have some poisons to worry about. They don't have as many poisons as Assassin Rogue for sure. But we do have some. There's 4 here, and you definitely want to have your poisons on as a rogue because it still matters, even with Outlaw. In this case, I'm going to use Instant and Atrophic. Atrophic's a really good one for group content because it reduces the damage your enemy does, and Instant's just your damaging poison. So we're going to set up a aura to track that. In this case, I'm going to just duplicate this one real quick, and we'll change its settings as needed. Call it poisons. I'm gonna go ahead and call it out. I know I have one set up for send called poisons, so we're just going to do this. And then in this case, the trigger is an all. And what you're looking for is buffs, because this is actually a buff that goes on your character. In this case, it's a buff called, it should be called instant poison, I believe. I just type in instant poison, yep. Or is missing. And you can put and, since in this case we'll probably always use these two. There's usually not a reason not to in group content. Or if you prefer, you can just put one poison. You could if you think you might use something other than instant and atrophic as a combo, you could actually do a custom function and put like a list of all the poisons in here and do the case-based ands and ors like we've done for the other triggers. But for this case, you're probably going to be sticking to these two, or at least for the case of this test, we are going to. You'll want to take out the display because there's no key binding for these. But now it shows up the instant poison icon when we don't have those buffs applied. So if I click this, there's instant poison, but the buff went away. The icon went away for some reason. It should not have, because it should be looking for both these buffs to be applied. So let's check that out. Trigger 1, or is missing, instant poison and atrophic poison. Oh, that is interesting. I expected it to do an and on both of those, but it might be considering that an either or situation. So just to clean this up to make sure it works the way we want, we're going to add a second buff or tracker for atrophic. And say aura missing on that. What that should do now is only work if both. Well, it's gonna only work if both. Okay, now I know what the screw up was. It's trying to say the aura will only be active if both are missing. It's not either or. So if one's available and the other is missing, the aura will show up because the case is that they're not both missing. So in this case, since you're likely to apply multiple poisons when you apply any of them, what we can actually do is go ahead and just put in all 4 of these poisons. Like so. And these are buffs, so you gotta type it. It doesn't like to do. It doesn't handle shift click very well on these. But put all these in, and now what should happen is if you're ever at a point where you're missing your poisons, like all your poisons, it should show up. But if you apply one, it goes away. So if we test it, see, we get rid of that one, and yep, there it goes. Now it's working the way I thought it would at the end there. So we have, let's apply these 2 poisons to get rid of that icon. Now, another thing we want to add is rogues have these crimson vials that give them a bit of self-healing. So we're going to do crimson vial. These are more defensive style stuff. So what we're going to do is the trigger needs to be player unit info, health, player, and the health percent. Now, if we read Crimson Vial, drink a concoction that heals you for 25% of your max health over 4%. Likelihood is you're probably going to get healed by some sort of AoE healing when you're in a raid or a group content. So you don't want it to be exactly 25% health missing. What you want more is something like 30% or 35% or 40%, somewhere in that range. So we're going to make this as if you were missing 30% health. So we're going to set this to 70, just to give it a number. I usually use 50 or 60 because, again, the AoE healing, you don't want to waste a global cooldown on something that you're likely not going to have to worry about. So 70% is a safe bet, but for purposes of making sure you're not wasting a global cooldown, it's probably better to set this to more like 50. And then add trigger. We're going to need that action usable again for this one so we can see if you can even use Crimson Vial. So we set Crimson Vial, and that one we want on top. And we want that action usable, and that's it. And then this one is actually on my Alt key, so we're going to set this to Alt D or AV. And since I'm a Draenei, there's actually another one that I have a macro for. We need to go to macros. That is their gift of nature. It has astral shift in there because this is similar to the one I use on my shaman. This is the same one I use on my shaman. But the main priority here is this line here: cast and then square brackets at player, gift of Naru. What that does is it tells the macro to cast it at yourself rather than having to target somebody. So we put that in like AS, and what I usually do is this AF will be a Hellstone, and then the next one will be any class abilities, and then the next one is like racial abilities. So now we have that on there, and we don't need to worry about taking Astral Shift out of there. It just won't use it because it's not available. I'd rather leave it in there so that when I go back to my shaman, I don't have to take up a macro slot for it. But so what we need to do is duplicate this and put in gift of the Naru, and probably put out on it because I'm pretty sure I have it somewhere else. And in this case, it's up to you which one you'd rather use first. Gift of the Naru is a 3 minute cooldown, whereas that's 30 seconds. They heal for roughly the same amount. I will probably leave it like this because I'd rather use the short cooldown thing first. So we'll go into triggers and do that. Change this to gift of the Naru. And then change this to AS for where the key binding's at. And it will show Crimson Vial first. So if you're following the priority system, you would use that first and then skip over gift. If you wanted to flip it, just move this up above Crimson Vial and it will flip the order. There's also other, and then like, they're already on here, but I'll go over them real quick. Evasion and Cloak of Shadows, you don't use on cooldown, and you only use, and it's more of a specific occasion inside a fight that you'd want to use it. Like if you happen to be face tanking for some reason because the tank died, you'd want to use evasion, or if you have something on you want to cloak out of, So instead of putting it in rotation, I put it in the CD section. There are more you could add on here if you want. I know that, for instance, Outlaw has the grappling hook. That would be a good place for this. So we just to show you, we could put it in here. And this order doesn't matter as much. It's more about how you want it to look and how you feel comfortable putting them on there. So like grappling hook, and then these are usually just action usables. So we'll do grappling hook here. Not sure why that has the aura for subterfuge in it. Can't think of why, so I'll just delete that real quick so that works properly. Yeah, that one's got it too, so we'll delete that. And that will just say, hey, grappling hooks can be used if you want to. So that would be SS. And then like you could put shadow step on there. Basically anything that has a cooldown that you want to track that you'd rather have up here above your character instead of have to look at your hotbar. One macro I want to show you real quick in regards to Rogue that I have set up is this. It's a stealth and vanish combined macro. So what it does is it uses stealth if you're not in combat, so that you're not, but if you are in combat, it'll use vanish. One, it will keep you from using the cooldown of vanish unneededly. Two, it saves you a hot button key binding spot, which I'm always a fan of. Another weak aura we do need to set up though before we call this done is one for kick. I always make that a high priority because usually when you're trying to kick something, it's a big deal. So we'll make a new aura. Let's break it off of this and call it kick. Kick's the name of the spell. That's why I'm calling it that. I know that kick is usually used as a wide term for anybody who has a spell interrupt. So we'll start with action usable. Kick. In this case, we're actually going to go to spell and not spell, sorry, player unit info. There it is, cast. And then you want to check your target and check interruptible. What that means is interruptible. It means can this spell that this thing is casting be kicked? And that's all you need to know. You leave the triggers alone, you go to the display and set this to A, and you now can tell when something that somebody is casting can be kicked. And it will show up here as one of the first on your list so that you know that it's a high priority to use. And that would be the end of the video. We have gone through everything there is for Weakauras as far as programming your own rotation and setting up some basic ones. I hope it's been an enjoyable experience and I've helped some of you learn some more about Weakauras and how to program your own. So good luck with that. I do have a Discord if you want to connect with me there, and I'm open to any questions you might have about Weakauras or helping you program your own. And I will read the comments on this video, and I do have plans for additional videos that I'll be making if this turns out to work, if this turns out good. It's my first one, so I'm a little hesitant about how it's going to go, but we'll see. I do also want to mention that I do have a Twitch, and as well as on my Shopify, I have a 3D printer that I make some articulated models with. The links are at the bottom of the screen there, so check that out. And let me know if you have any comments or maybe suggestions for new videos or questions or concerns. Thank you.